All right, I think we will begin. So for those of you that got here by 9 o'clock, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm sure a few more will be joining as we go along, and we'll just include them as they show up. Let's see. Welcome everybody. I really appreciate you being here today. My name is Jeremy Cherney, and I'm the owner of Tobin Solutions, and that's me for what I look like. Today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. We're going to be talking about where that fits into your organization and why we feel this should be a high priority for you for 2021. So along the way, there's going to be a lot of learnings and discoveries. And along the way, you're probably going to have some questions. You can feel free to drop those in the Q&A in the chat. Also at the end, I'll stick around for any questions. We can unmute you at that time. Also at the end of this, for those of you that registered, you're going to receive a brief survey and the presentation slides via email. So I'd like you to please complete that survey because your feedback is so valuable. So I'm going to talk about what this learning path looks like a little bit, because some of you maybe have been to our security webinars before. Some of you may be new to this. There's a lot of news right now about cybersecurity and a lot of attacks that are happening and making the headlines. So, depending on where you're at, you might be in this space where you kind of have your head in the sand on some things, and that's okay. Being here today is your first opportunity to really take your head out of the sand in that case. So thank you for being here. There's going to be some scary stuff as we go along, right? We're talking about people's businesses. We're talking about money. We're talking about reputation. And we're talking about, new things that may be uncertain, maybe a little fear around. So it's going to be natural to be a little concerned as we go along the way. And that's fine. But in the end, you're going to have information. You're going to have opportunities for action. And, hopefully at that point, you're going to be empowered to actually do something about this. We talk at Tobin Solutions, about being security strong. And along the way, you're going to see this muscle here. And, what I'm inviting you to look at is, to the extent that this webinar is actually going to make a difference for you and your company, is going to be in those actions you take or don't take in the future. So when you see that muscle, pay special attention. And those are really some places that you can really get into action. And we invite you getting into action now if you're not already. So, we're talking about cybersecurity. Our business has lots of, TLAs, right? I hope you guys know what TLAs are. You probably have them in your business too. The three-letter acronyms. We have three-letter acronyms. We have all kinds of jargon that we use to talk about cybersecurity. And so I want to build a little bit of a foundation on that for you as we go along in this conversation. One of the words we talk about is a blind spot. And a blind spot is something that you don't know about your security posture. So it's important to, as you're going through, where you're probably going to discover some blind spots for yourself, right? Maybe an example of a blind spot might be, maybe you've got a shed in your backyard and the lock is broken, the lock is all rusted away, and people can get in, right? If you don't know that, that's kind of a blind spot for you. Once you know the lock is rusted and not working, you have an opportunity to go fix it. So as you're going along in this webinar, you're probably going to be discovering some blind spots. And I'd encourage you to write those down and look what actions you can take around dealing with those blind spots. Another takeaway I want you to have from this is that security is only as good as its weakest link, right? You must be right 100% of the time, and hackers really only need to be right just once. So as you're going through this, those blind spots, those weak links in security. It might be a blind spot in something that you didn't know was an issue. It might be something that you had a thought as we're going through the webinar to check into, but those are really where the attacks are going to come in. Also for you security purists out there, I'm going to use the term hackers out here. In security land, hackers is actually kind of a derogatory term because hackers are usually the good guys, but on the news and that we talk about hackers as being the bad guys. So for the context of this webinar, we're going to be talking about hackers as the bad guys. But the people that are doing the security researchers, the people that are discovering these security weaknesses and letting the world know so that you can fix them, they like to, they're often like to be called hackers. So part of learning the lingo is, when we're talking about security and you're here, taking time out of your day and kicking off 2021 with learning about security, when we talk about a security incident, what are we even talking about? And when we talk about a security incident, we talk about any breach in your CIA. C is the confidentiality of your internal or external data or systems, right? If you have a breach of confidentiality, that means that somebody who is unauthorized has access to your internal data or systems. Simple as that. Authorized people, not a breach. Unauthorized people, a breach. Could also be looking at integrity. If you send a contract to one of your clients and that contract shows up just as it was written and your client gets it and it all looks great, no breach of integrity. If somewhere along the way in between sending that contract, somebody jumps in and changes language in the contract and that person is unauthorized to change that data in the contract, it's a breach of integrity, right? If someone goes into your payroll system who is authorized to change payroll data and makes a change, perfect, no breach of integrity. Someone who's not authorized goes into your payroll system, makes a change, breach of integrity. And lastly, it's availability. And people don't always think about availability when it comes to security. We talk about availability. We're talking about your systems and data, that they're working and ready when you need them. So if your network is down, that is a security incident because you can't get access to your data and your systems. Maybe it's not as big of a deal maybe for your accounting system if you can't get access to it for an hour. What if it's your security system that manages your physical security for your building? What if it's the security for an elevator, right? If those are down, if those aren't available, that can be a real issue for you in terms of security. So here's our first muscle, right? The big idea. I want you to come away really knowing in your bones, really knowing who you are and why you're here, is that security is a process. It is not a product. If you come away thinking, if I just buy a better antivirus or a better firewall, then I'm protected, that's going to provide some additional measure of protection, but it's not really what the point is that we're trying to get across to today. What we really want you to understand is that how you do security is more important than the security you actually provide. Here's an example. You leave your house and you have a lock on your door, right? Is a lock provide security? Not really. It's the act of turning the key and locking the bolt, locking your door, and then jiggling it to make sure that it's actually closed and locked. That really is the part that makes it secure. So as you start to go through this webinar today, think of these things in terms of processes and things that you can look for and how to verify whether you have a process, whether that process is working and being used. And if not, what do you need to put into place? Something that really gets in the way of effective security is what I call security superstitions. What's a superstition? It's a belief or practice resulting from ignorance, fear of the unknown, trust in magic or chance, or a false conception of causation. And there are no shortage of security superstitions out there. They really prevent people from really getting into action or taking effective actions. There's just a few up here, but there's lots of them. We've heard for years that people say, well, I use a Mac and so I'm safe. Well, you're safe from issues that impact Windows, but there's many, many security issues out there that impact Macs. Or you think you're using a cloud, like, Google's got my back or Microsoft's got my back. Those guys get hacked. It does happen. It was recently there was a hack that involved Microsoft and SolarWinds and another product that does mail filtering. So these things do happen. Some people just get complacent because they haven't been hit before, or they think they're too small, or they say they trust their team and they don't want to be a big brother. There's nothing wrong with trusting your team, but you're trusting a bunch of humans. And humans are not perfect. We are imperfect. We make mistakes. And the last one is I got a guy. And while we definitely encourage you to work with cybersecurity experts, what we're really talking about here is that abdication, is that you've abdicated to somebody to look to handle your security without really talking to them about what you need, what you want, and how to inspect that they're getting their job done. Something that comes up a lot is security and privacy. They'll sometimes get commingled. Security refers to how your information is protected. Privacy are those rights that you have, right? When you sign up with Facebook and you click through their little end user agreement, terms of service, they're telling you how they're going to protect your data, but they're also telling you what rights you have and what rights they have on using your data. And if they violate that term of service, that's really that privacy violation. We're not going to talk too much about that today, but it is a different concept. One of the things I want you to be thinking about as we go through today is classifying your data. That is the process of categorizing your data assets based on its value and its risk of exposure. And then there's a handful of examples here of different types of ways to classify data, right? If you put information on your website about your company address and phone number, that would be good public data, and that you could classify that way. That's okay to expose on the public internet. Maybe your personal cell phone is not something you want on your website. That might be more of an internal piece of data, right? Confidential information, restricted, regulatory, top secret. By classifying your data, they're going to have different levels of expectations on protecting it and how that data is handled. So this is one of the things you want to think about for you. This might be a blind spot for you if you haven't really gone through and classified your data. Another muscle here, right? The security strong here around encryption and decryption. Encryption is the process of taking your data, which is often in plain text, and it translates it through a mathematical engine into something that appears random and meaningless. And then decryption is reversing that process, because eventually you want to read that document, and if it's random and meaningless, you aren't going to be able to read it. So you want to decrypt it so that you can actually read what's in there. We have data all over the place, right? We're talking about that data classification, but you've got data sitting on your servers and your desktop. You're sending data back and forth in transit with email. You may have data on your flash drives and hard drives. You've got email and backups. Your websites, are your websites secure? Your cloud storage. So the reason why this is important is because if there is a breach of confidentiality, meaning an unauthorized party gets access to your data, right? If they get on one of your files and it's encrypted, they may have the file, but they can't read it. So you want to really be looking, where should you be encrypting and decrypting and encrypting your data, such that if it ever gets out of your control, if it ever gets to an unauthorized party, they're not going to be able to get at that data. Data exfiltration definitely happens, can happen a lot in various ways, and that's simply when malware and or a malicious actor carries out an unauthorized data transfer from a computer. So that's somebody taking your data off your workstation, out of your email, out of your server, out of your cloud, and bringing it somewhere else so they can do something with it. They can steal it, they can review it. And it's here we have a picture of this bad hacker with the magnet sucking out your data. It could be an employee, or more often is a former employee, somebody who's, maybe someone that had a grudge, maybe that, an ex-employee, maybe a salesperson or an accountant or anybody in your organization, really, right? They have access to whatever data they've got. If they take that and leave, what can they do with that? And is that something you want to protect yourself from? The dark web. This is another kind of, this is out there. It's kind of a buzzword, I think, in some ways. It's this aspect of the internet, right? When you Google things and you search for things, you're looking on the public web. All of that information is searchable by Google. There's another web. It's out there, it's accessible, but it's not accessible in that you can search for it from Google. You got to know where to go. You might need special privileges or know somebody. And this is where kind of the nasty stuff happens on the web. This is where, people are selling illegal drugs or human trafficking or stolen data and credit cards and all the nastiness that's out there in the world that's transacted in the dark web. We're seeing a lot of people offering people to do dark web scans and look at the dark web. What I'm going to assert is probably most of you that are on this webinar right now already have some information on the dark web, because breaches are happening all the time. It could be for services you've used. It could be for services that you never even signed up for, but they, maybe a marketing company happens to have your email and address and some of that information. Once something's on the dark web, there's almost nothing you can do to get it off. So people that say they can get your information off the dark web and clear it are mostly blowing smoke at you, unless they're one of these hackers that are going to go out there and somehow remove it. But it's unlikely, and I wouldn't get too scared that it's out there, because it's happening regularly. It's going to continue to happen, but it does exist. There's a lot of different ways people get attacked. I want to talk about some of the common ones. I'm really just going to point to the first two. Ransomware. Ransomware is when a malicious party gets access to your systems and they encrypt your data for you, and they hold the key. And when they've got the key, no force on earth can really decrypt your data until they give you the key. And they're going to charge you for that key. And there's the ransom. And they often want that ransom in terms of forms of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, I think, $30,000 a coin today. There is a lot of pull for bad actors performing ransomware, because they can do it from anywhere in the world and they can make a lot of money doing it. And sometimes you got to pay the ransom, sometimes you don't. It depends how well protected you are and how valuable the data is that was encrypted. Phishing and spear phishing, you've all been subject to that. That's where people are sending you those emails, trying to get you to enter credentials like your ID and password, trying to get you to sign into a system, Google or Office 365. They look real, they look like something you'd expect, and yet they're really just trying to get that personal information so that they can go and attack your data or impersonate you and do something as impersonating you. So those are the ones that are really common. There's some other ones out there, but those are the two we're seeing quite a bit. This might be the scariest slide in the whole deck, and that is that hacking is a professional business. I want you to get clear about that. Hacking is a professional business. There are people out there. It's no longer just the person with the grudge, the ex-employee, or the person that's it's them against the world. There are people out there, usually crime syndicates and sometimes nation states, that are making a lot of money by doing the ransomware. They're making a lot of money by hacking into systems and selling that data and doing things with it. It's immensely profitable and very low overhead to make it happen. You can have a few people sitting in a computer somewhere around the world using well-written, understood software that's designed and made available to them specifically to try and to attack your systems, encrypt your data, and request a ransom. And they're making a lot of money doing this. So that's why it's scary, right? What do people do when there's money? They do something. They want to get that money. Here's just a few headlines, and these are actually from probably last year. There's headlines every day now on ransomware, and it's rough. So you got to really protect yourself. It's happening, and if you're not taking steps to ensure that you're protected from ransomware, you could really be subject to a lot of money. It can be anywhere from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was one recently that was over $30 million was the ransom for a big company. So, you might be thinking to yourself, why might I have a security incident? These are, some of the reasons. People don't have a policy on it. You're just kind of saying, well, we're just going to assume people are going to do it, or maybe I mentioned at a meeting once that people should take things, be secure. But unless you have a policy of what you're expecting and what you want for your organization, it's going to be all best effort. Maybe you're not planning and preparing, so if you haven't been doing that, or you've been doing it to limited effectiveness, hopefully today you'll get into action on that. If you're not training your team on cybersecurity, again, you're kind of missing a huge opportunity to have them be part of the solution rather than be part of the problem. I'm definitely seeing a lot of people on this call that I know. You should really be having this presentation internally at your organization. We can do that for you. Highly recommend it. If you're not following best practices, if you're using vulnerable technology, if you're not watching the systems, those are all reasons you're going to have it. Security being inconvenient, that's a big thing. We've had a lot of clients. We've been talking to our clients now for a few years about adding two-factor authentication, which we'll talk about more later, to their systems as a real easy way to protect their systems. And, they chose not to. And I get that because security is inconvenient. It takes some time. It's complex. And, since then, a lot of them have come back after they've been attacked and had a breach to add that two-factor authentication. So, I get it's inconvenient. What's really inconvenient is losing your business. What's really inconvenient is losing your reputation. What's really inconvenient is having to pay ransom. So I'd invite you to set that aside and look at what it would look like to add the right kind of security you need to protect yourself. And lastly, people are human. Things would be a lot more secure if we didn't have to worry about the people. But the people are the users. And people make mistakes. People have weak moments. People are forgetful. We all click OK when we meant to click cancel. We all get tired at the end of the day, at the end of the week, right? Anybody a little tired these days? When you're tired, you're more likely to make a mistake. So, think about that. That's definitely, we're all suffering some of those. Another muscle here. We talk about security as a process, not a product. This is a process. It is a 5-step process developed by the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's a nice example of your tax dollars at work. They created this, they update this. A lot of organizations use this as a basis for how they handle cybersecurity, and it's these 5 big steps at the top. You first have to identify what it is you're trying to protect. You then need to take the steps to actually protect it. You then need to put in systems to detect when these things might be happening. And when it happens for you, because it's likely to happen for you, if it hasn't happened already, you can almost certainly guarantee it's going to happen in the future. How are you going to respond, and how do you recover? Those 5 steps become a framework, become a model, become a process for which to handle cybersecurity in your organization. So there's a link to it down there at the bottom, and you want to really look and see, are you following a process like this? One of those ways you take someone through that process is through the security audit. It's that first step to identify what you've got. And these are some of the steps that we go through when we perform a security audit. If you haven't had a security audit, this is a place where you want to get into action. Do it yourself, bring in your IT provider, bring in Tobin Solutions, whoever that is. You want to make sure that someone's going through and looking at your policies, your compliance needs, what are your plans, are you following best practices, are there any blind spots we find, are we can scan the network looking for vulnerabilities, test things out, and in the end, you're going to get a report, an actionable report that says, here's what's been found, here's what's working, here's what's not working, and here are some things that we think you should be doing to remediate. And then, get into remediation, close those blind spots, fix those issues. Another muscle, right? What are your policies around your confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your systems? A lot of you are subject to various compliance needs, right? If you take credit cards, you're subject to compliance. We'll talk about those more later. What are your expectations? Every business has different expectations for how long they can be down, what they expect to do, what they think employees can and can't do. Budget drives some of this, how systems are managed and maintained, how to respond if there's an incident, when there's an incident, and how do you actually enforce your policies. You've got to get these things in writing. These have to be clearly communicated to those who you hold accountable for your cybersecurity posture. Whether it's an internal person, whether it's your IT provider, you want to make sure that there's clear policies so that there's something to measure to. One of the things you want to be thinking about is your RTO, your recovery time objective. If your systems are down, if your systems are unavailable, how quickly do you need to be back up and running? From the time there's a security incident, the clock starts ticking. If your systems are down, every minute, every hour, every day that goes by is what your recovery time is going to look like. What are your expectations on what that should look like? Do you need to be up and running in 4 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks? You have to set that clear expectation so that your IT provider, your security provider is managing to that expectation. The flip side of the RTO is your RPO, your recovery point objective. From the moment that you get attacked, from the moment that breach happens, if there's going to be a data loss of some sort, if we have to roll back your server or your email box because something got compromised, how far back do we need to be able to go? The government recently discovered that they have been under assault by Russia, most likely, using a product from a company called SolarWinds, which was meant to be a trusted security product, except it got compromised. That's been going on for months and months and months. If they had to roll back, if their recovery point objective was, say, 30 days, and this has been going on for months, you may not be able to recover to a proper state before the security incident occurred. So you want to think, how far back do you need to go? And in some cases, you're bound by regulations and laws. You might have keep data for 7 days, 7 years, 10 years, things like that. So you want to be thinking about your RPO. We talked a bit about compliance before. You're all probably subject to some form of compliance, and you want to look at what that is. If you take credit cards, PCI DSS. If you store personally identifiable information, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, things like that. You have a certain accountability for dealing with that information. If you're involved in healthcare, you've got HIPAA. If you're a public company, you've got Sarbanes-Oxley. If you deal with, if you're an attorney, you've got state bar ethics rules. If you do work in the European Union, you might be subject to GDPR. If you do work for defense, CMMC. If you have cyber liability insurance, which we're going to talk a bit more in, which we strongly encourage you to get, there are probably covenants inside that policy that you're supposed to be adhering to. And if you don't adhere to those, follow those, they might deny your claim. And this keeps evolving. The more attacks that are out there, the more it impacts people's personal safety, the more it impacts the dollars, the more it impacts reputation, trust, fiduciary responsibilities, the more you can expect these more regulations, more laws, more compliance needs. Think about your physical security. We've had clients that have laptops stolen. We've had clients that had, lost a laptop, got drowned in a lake, right? So you've got, the physical security. You want to make sure your server room is locked. You've got proper environment, maybe security cameras, locking things down with security cables and desktops. If someone's going to go work somewhere in a public space, that's obviously less common nowadays. Pre-COVID, people would go to Starbucks and sit there and do work and crank up the laptop and maybe step up to get their coffee, their double tall latte, and then turn around and their computer's gone. Cables for desktops, laptops, to physically lock them down. And then if they do get stolen, making sure that the storage on those devices is encrypted. Power is a big issue. When we mentioned that the A in CIA is availability of systems. If your power's out, can you access your servers? Maybe. So you want to look, if there's lightning strikes, surge protection, battery backup, properly configured to shut down those servers when there's a power event. Maybe you need a generator for your facility, and then you want to test things periodically. You want to simulate a power outage and make sure that your expectations on what's going to happen there are going to be met. You know, in some cases, you might only have 10 or 15 minutes to save your data and shut things down, and that might be satisfactory. Maybe you need 4 hours of power because, you know, your business is such that you can't afford to be down for 4 hours, and a power outage just doesn't meet your needs, right? So you want to make sure you've got that and set those expectations. Security awareness training. Note the muscle in the corner. You've got to train your users. Let me rephrase that. You don't have to. We strongly recommend it. Have them be on your team as part of knowing what's happening here. Training new employees. When they come on board, you know, we're talking about those security policies before, and that humans are the ones that, you know, often are part of the problem. If they don't know what your expectations are on security, you know, they're just going to do whatever they do. Best efforts. What you think is common sense is uncommon. You want to make sure they're very clear what the expectations are. You know, you want to subscribe to newsletters and alerts and make sure you know what's happening. You know, we have newsletters that we send out. Some of our clients subscribe to our Scam of the Week messaging. So, you know, to know when there's something coming out, because people take advantage of that. It becomes part of the conversation. You know, when COVID came out, there was a lot of scams around COVID and testing and, you know, click here to get the latest, and people fell for it. And when you're doing your awareness training, like other things you might do at work, you want to test it out. Is it effective? Are people actually taking the education and being safer, or are they still clicking through? And what do you do with those people that still click through those emails and those web pages? And this is not a one and done thing. You know, once is helpful. I think what some studies say, you have to hear something 7 to 15 times before it really clicks. And that's just what you know now. There are new attacks. There are new types of things you want people to be aware of. So you want it to be ongoing. You know, we're in a mobile world. You know, people are at, you know, again, this slide seems so quaint these days, right? The idea of being at a hotel or a coffee shop or an airport or a conference facility and working. You know, hopefully we're on the getting close to being able to get back to that kind of life later this year and next year. But, you know, you still got people working from home as well, and some of these still come into play. Are you safe when you're doing that? When you're not inside your office working, are you safe outside the office? And then, you know, it depends. You want to make sure that you're using applications that are using end-to-end encryption. You want to make sure you're running a local firewall on those computers. If you ever go into a place where there's public Wi-Fi and it asks you to install an intermediary certificate or install a new certificate, don't do that. That certificate will allow them to decrypt your data. And you want to use a virtual private network where you can. You know, smart speakers may be an issue. You know, you've got people working from home and they're having conversations with your clients, maybe confidential conversations. And if they're sitting there with a smart speaker, those are always listening, right? That's the convenience of it. You know, to be able to ask it what time it is, what's the weather, play some music, set an alarm, but they're always listening. And you know, sometimes they get kicked off and you're like, why did that just activate? You know, it gets erroneously turns itself on to take your command. All those recordings are often saved. You know, you might, if you are an Amazon or Google Home user, you know, you want to look, those things might be there. Do you want to have your team disable those just to ensure that nothing's erroneously being recorded? Most of them have an option to turn that off. Could be a blind spot for some of you if you are worried about confidential conversations. Note the muscle in the corner. Cyber liability insurance. If all else fails, you know, you've done everything here and everything is great, and somehow you're still breached, the only way that you might be made whole in the end is through what's happening with your cyber liability insurance. So you want to contact your insurance agent today and make sure that you have the proper type of cyber liability insurance that you need, that covers the types of perils that you might come across. Make sure you understand the provisions in that policy. Like I said, there might be covenants in there, and if you're not following those, there might be a covenant in there that you have antivirus software running or that you're regularly patching your systems. If you're not doing that, they might not pay out. And it's not usually included in your base business policy. So you want to look. It's a carve out now, right? As I mentioned, it's very expensive these days when you have a big cyber liability or cyber incident. It can cost thousands, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So insurance companies, whenever there's that kind of a peril, they carve it out as a separate policy with separate actuarial science behind it in terms of what that should cost and what it should cover. And those change quickly, so you want to review those policies yearly. Get good cyber liability insurance. And what about the people you work with? What about your partners, your providers, your vendors, even some of your important clients? What are they doing? Are they insured? You want to ask them. If you've got a great client that is a big part of your revenue, be their friend. Have them come to a presentation like this. If you want us to do a presentation like this for some of your clients or partners or groups you belong to, we're happy to do it. But they got to get educated, to really make a difference. And are they insured? If you've got critical suppliers that aren't insured and they get hit, that could mess with your supply chain. They might have some of your business data if they're a critical partner and they get hit. If they don't have proper insurance to help make you whole in that instant, it's going to be tough. So check in on them. A little bit about credit cards and banking. We're not a credit card company or a banking institution. Obviously, we're a IT service provider and security service provider. But people ask about these. So in my opinion, avoid using your debit card. Credit cards actually have better protections. And if your credit card is breached, your bank account isn't immediately drained while they sort out the fraud. If you've got your checking account and that's your main operating account, maybe set up a separate bank account, especially if you're doing any allowing people to do ACH withdrawals. Maybe even set up a separate account at another bank. At Tobin Solutions, we have multiple banks and multiple banking accounts that we use, and we move money around. We only really keep money in some areas that are a little more accessible for things we need for that week and that month. If you get hit with one of these things, you see a breach, report it immediately. If you don't report it immediately and you wait too long, your ability to recover may be limited, and they may even just deny your claim. We're in this world of shared responsibility. You're going to see that more and more, the shared security responsibility model. It's not just on them to make things secure anymore. Like it or not, it's shared now. You're part of the team here to keep things secure. And if you don't tell people when you see something, they may not restore what you lost. Wire transfers. If you are transferring money or being asked to transfer money, it's often via email if it's a hack. If someone's trying to seduce you into conning you into sending them money, get verbal approval and really look at that wire transformation. Does it look legitimate? Call them up. Call up the person you know. Walk over and talk to your CFO. Talk to the owner of your company. Call your client. Call the customer. We're transferring money here. Let's make sure it's correct. And not just that they sent you a wire transfer, because that might be a normal part of your business, but that the information, remember we talked about integrity as a breach, that the wire transfer instructions have not been changed or altered. And I would check your accounts regularly, maybe even daily, and review your bank statements. Make sure that what you've got in there is what you expect. Another muscle in the corner, use your account best practices. It used to be, and in some cases still is, something that people do when they log into their computer, they're running as an administrator account as opposed to a standard user. Administrator accounts not only let you use your programs, but they allow you to modify those programs, install new software, change settings. Sometimes it's known as God mode on the computer, meaning when you're an administrator, you can do anything. Now, what happens if you're running as an administrator and you browse to a web page, and that web page tries to infect your computer with a virus? Well, it now has administrative privileges to do that. If you run as a standard user, it may not work. And there was one study that running as a standard user would prevent attacks from exploiting 94% of the critical vulnerabilities that Microsoft patched that year. That's stunning. 94%. So if you're running as an administrator, please stop it. Create another account that you use for your day-to-day usage. And only use the administrator account when you need to manage your computer. Two-factor or multi-factor authentication. This is becoming more popular these days. It's got another muscle in the corner. Please turn this on everywhere you can. Everywhere you can. Your banking sites, your cloud services, anywhere it works. That's where you get you get texted a number to your phone that you have to enter as part of your password, or you have a code that changes on your computer that with the authentication app that changes every 60 seconds. This is very simple security. It's often thought of as inconvenient security, but it's great because if your password ever gets away from you, if your ID and password somehow escapes your control, someone used a keystroke logger, or somebody, you wrote it down somewhere and someone got that. If they try and log in and they don't have your phone with that's going to get that code, they're not going to be able to log in as you. Now, you are going to see some places where some people are able to bypass some of this. That was more errors in implementation for how they implemented the two-factor authentication, which they're figuring out and changing. But it's still one of the best things you can do to protect accidental login, or I'm sorry, not accidental, intentional login of your data, of your systems and your ID and password. So take a look at this. Please make it happen as quickly as you can. And you'll definitely find yourself to be in a much safer posture. Patching best practices, another muscle in the corner. Read that last bullet point. 70% of organizations that suffered a security breach cite a known vulnerability that went unpatched. That's another stunning statistic. Patches are when those companies are making software updates. Sometimes they're adding new features, but sometimes they're fixing security holes. You want to make sure that your systems are patched regularly. That includes your desktops, your servers, the gear you use, your firewall, your phone, your tablet, all of those devices need to be updated. I just updated some devices today for my iPhone and my iPad. New updates, and what was in there? Security updates. You want to make sure you're doing those. Data backup best practices, another muscle in the corner. There's a lot of ways to look at data backup. This by far is the simplest and minimum threshold for what we recommend for security as a place to start. And it is an effective strategy if you're really following it. 3 copies of your data. You've got your primary data, that's the 1 copy. Then you have 2 other backups. One of those backups and those 2 other backups are on 2 different types of media. Maybe one is stored to a hard drive on your server, a secondary hard drive. Maybe it's on a flash drive. Some people still use tapes. That's 1 copy. And then you want the 3rd copy completely what we call air-gapped, not connected to your network. And it's stored off-site. So that extra copy is that if someone hacks into your system, or you have a physical disaster like a fire or a flood, you've got that other copy of data off-site. And it could be in the cloud, but you really want it separated such that if your systems get compromised, one of the things they do is they look to see if they can find out where your backups are and see if they can delete your backups or encrypt your backups as part of the ransomware attack. The same rule applies to cloud-based services. You want to get clear on what those look like for you. We think because we have our data in the cloud, everything is backed up and ready to go. And in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. By default, Microsoft, I think, is 14 to 30 days if you delete something and it's in the recycle bin before it gets deleted from the cloud. So if you lose something today and don't know about it for 40 days, you might lose that. Maybe you're using a small service, something specific to your business. You know, they might be really good at developing the software. They may not be so great at security. You hope they're doing things. They might assert that they're doing things. We don't really know what's happening. And like I said, they have to be right 100% of the time. So if you're using any of these services, if that data is critical to your business, I would engage them in a conversation of how are you going to back up that data yourself, have a copy of that data. And then go back and review your RTO and RPO policies that we discussed earlier and make sure that your data backup is going to meet those needs. When you've got these backups, you want to do some testing of it. Restore some files, restore a whole system. If you don't test your backup, we don't know that it's going to work. We don't want the time you actually need your backup to be the first test. And sometimes, depending on your RTO and RPO, you know, if you're saying you need to be back up and running in 2 hours, that is a different kind of conversation from just a data backup. That is really a disaster recovery business continuity solution, and you want to make sure that that works if you're saying it needs to be up and running in 2 hours. Another muscle, a lot of muscles here, right? Asset retirement and disposal. These computers and devices have a useful life. Eventually, they get obsoleted in some way. They break, they become too slow for the modern software and applications, and we dispose of them. Now, you know, our preference is you dispose of these responsibly. You know, can you reuse them somewhere? Can you recycle them or resell them? You know, it might be an old computer to you of 3 or 5 years old, might be a really great computer for somebody who's has to do school from home right now and is doing it off their parents' phone. Maybe a really neat opportunity to recycle some assets and get yourself a brand new computer. But if they end, regardless of whether they're going to somebody else or whether they're going into the recycle pile, you want to make sure you're wiping all the storage, securely wiping all the storage, getting off all that information that might be on there that's critical. And if for some reason you can't wipe it, you know, to physically destroy the storage. And there's some nasty chemicals and heavy metals and things like this in these computers. So again, you know, please don't just dump it into a landfill. Let's see if we can recycle it and try and make some use of it. Okay, internal threat here. And I realize I'm running a little behind here, so I'm going to pick up the pace a bit. You know, people are your biggest issue. 70% of the breaches are because somebody was careless, did something wrong, or did something intentionally. Where they do something wrong, that's that social engineering. That's where they're trying to take advantage of you being human. It's a con game. They're trying to get you to click, to take the bait, to do something. This is why that security awareness training is so important, because you're out there and they're going to try and phish you. They're going to send you those malicious emails that look legitimate and trying to get you to click on them or enter information into them. They may look like this. They may have some, you know, real obvious indications, like, if you're English speaking and the English doesn't look right, if it's urgency, if it's fear, and they're driving you to that, those are going to be some things that are going to, you know, be real obvious as you get better at this. These may be not so obvious. You know, there are people, you're getting these things from Amazon and PayPal and IRS, and they may be legitimate because you all pay taxes. You might use PayPal and you probably use Amazon, right? But they look real enough that you might click on them, take the bait. So again, never enter your information directly into those. Go to the websites. Same thing with these, Office 365 or Google Drive. They send you these things that look real, but if you really inspect the address at the top, where it's coming from, it's probably not. So again, really think before you click on these. Even these websites, they look real. And it's trivial to make them look real. It's trivial to grab the information off the current website of the organization and turn it into a fake website in a matter of seconds, and then create a little login screen where you can enter your ID and password. So If you're a Chase Bank user, don't click on the emails they send you. Go directly to the website and log in there, not by using the email, but by going using your web browser. So when you're thinking about this, there's a big decision on whether you're going to click or not. You want to go through this list and really verify, is this something that you should be clicking on? Because once you click, that starts the countdown, and oftentimes. Even looking for misspellings, Google with 2 zeros instead of 2 O's. You want to, we talked about security awareness training, and I'd like to extend that to what I call your neighborhood watch, right? We're familiar with these. It's where the communities get together and work with their law enforcement to keep their neighborhood safe, and they're part of looking out at what's happening. Same thing around cybersecurity. Get your team involved. Work hand in hand with your IT services, your IT provider, to create that neighborhood watch. That will improve cybersecurity results across the board. If you do get hit with something, don't just keep it to yourself. Report it to your supervisor, report it to your IT department, because if you're getting attacked, it's likely other people are getting attacked in your organization, or maybe even your clients, customers. So report it immediately and let others know so they can get into action on this. And we talked about ransomware. Again, that's where they encrypt your data and get money. It really looks like this. This is an actual ransomware screen. Notice how professional that looks. They even have a contact us and a little frequently asked questions. It's a professional business. They operate like it. It's not an ethical business, but they do operate like a business. Sometimes you got to watch out for hacked hardware. Sometimes, you find these things, you find these flash drives, you pick them up at trade shows, things like that. You don't know what's on there. It'd be trivial to go to a trade show, grab a flash drive off someone's table, load it with malware, and then put it back on the table. Or what if I dropped off David and Zoe's wedding photos and put it in your parking lot? How many of your team would pick it up and plug it into a computer to try and help David and Zoe? Best of intentions. I get it. It can cause you a lot of grief and money and time. Fake phone calls. Boy, there are no shortage of fake phone calls going on right now. No one from Microsoft's going to call you and tell you you've got a virus. They're never going to call you and ask for your password. Watch for those callback numbers. I think we're getting pretty good at responding to those, but people still fall for them. I had a good friend that fell for it a couple months ago. Password managers. We're still in this world of a lot of passwords. Without a password manager, you're stuck either writing them down or trying to come up with your own creative passwords and trying to make them unique. We want to make sure you don't reuse passwords across websites. If one gets breached, what are they going to do? They're going to go to all the other websites and try that password. So you want to use a good password manager like LastPass, where it'll create these very complex passwords for you. It'll store them for you securely, and it'll help you enter those into the websites and services that you use. They even have an emergency mode in some of these, which is nice. So like my wife and I use this. If I'm ever incapacitated, she can request access to my account, and if I don't respond within a predetermined period of time, she'll get my passwords. Do your family a favor, set up something like that, because if you ever become incapacitated, the last thing you want them to do is trying to figure out your password to your bank, to your 401k. Make it easy. There's a lot of other blind spots out there. We all see these QR codes, or even at restaurants now for those touchless menus. It'd be trivial to create your own QR code, create a sticker, and paste it over the menu. Maybe you've got those big TVs hanging on your wall in your conference room, and those smart TVs. Those are just big computers hanging on your wall, and they're on your network. Are they being updated? So you want to be looking. Where are you plugging things in? Where are you connecting? Where are you giving people access to systems? Where are you using something to enter data into your system? You want to look for those because you may have some blind spots there. If you're using any of these and you're not sure what these mean or whether you're protected, talk to somebody who knows about security. There's a few useful websites here. Have I Been Pwned? PWNED is kind of neat. You can go there, and that's one of those. It'll look and see if your data is, if you're showing up in any of these data breaches where they've dumped IDs and passwords and things like that. Don't be too scared if you're on there. You want to look at what it's saying. it might be a user, it might be an email and an address. Well, that's just marketing data. But if it's got a password breach, you want to make sure you're going in and correcting that password. Some people sign up for identity theft services. I'd recommend you take a look at what those really can do. Go to identitytheft.gov for more information around that. What Consumer Report says is they can monitor your identity to a point. They can tell whether your information's on the dark web, but they can't remove information from the dark web. They can't prevent theft of your identity, and to some extent, they can help you restore your identity if it happens. Check your own insurance coverage. And I invite you, as you've gone through this whole webinar today, think about your own life. Think about your home, your family, the communities you serve. Maybe you're on a nonprofit board, or you're in your church, or business group or something like that. Make sure they've got this information as well. But for your insurance coverage, check your homeowner's policy, check your renter's policy. And then you want to get into action. Another muscle here. If you come out of today and you don't see any actions take because you really have nothing to do, I get it. But if you're seeing some things that you're unsure about, if you're seeing some things like, well, I don't really know the answer to this, I invite you to get into action before it's too late. And this is a basic plan. Get that security audit done. Check your security policies and compliance needs. Check your insurance. Implement the technology and systems and processes you need to protect your assets. Do that awareness training. Implement a detection system that going forward is going to help catch those security incidents. Do a disaster recovery test. Make sure it's all going to work. And then you got to do this regularly, at least yearly. You want to go through and make sure you're handling your business this way. So if security is only as good as its weakest link, hopefully you've discovered that today, that maybe you have some weak links out there. Where are you going to get into action today? It might simply be a follow-up phone call with us or your IT provider. It might be a call to your insurance agency. Take some meaningful action today that's going to make a difference in your cybersecurity posture before it's too late. All right, I am going to unmute you guys first in a moment here. First, I just want to say thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time and your attention today. I love doing this kind of speaking, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do something that I love doing. If you want me to do this at your office, at your business group, in some other organization, we're open to doing that. Let us know. We also started a podcast called Security Strong. So you can visit securitystrongpodcast.com, and we invite you to listen to it. We invite you to subscribe to our social media and our newsletter so that you can stay on top of information and future webinars. And so thank you again for being here. Welcome to 2021. Hopefully by the end it's going to look a lot different than 2020 did for some of those things that didn't work for 2020. I wish you all to be safe and well and prosperous in the new year. And now